Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Over half a century driving the people of Tipperary and surrounding areas with quality, reliable and economical vehicles, new and used. Call the sales team today to discuss your next car or van on 067 24111.
Thanks, Pat. Welcome back to the final hour of Tip Today. Martin Brown was on to us to say great interview with John. That would be John Lahey. We need to have a lot more understanding of what people with addictions are going through. Another listener on to say, just want to say that man is good to tell about where there's trouble and then coming looking for help and going into treatment centres. They say it's a joke lately going in. Most people there 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, I have to read through that and see what the story with that is. Tony is in Ballymac. He says, off topic, Fran, I didn't realise how my association of many happy returns on birthdays and the like is a British thing, says Tony. Well, does that put you off? Does that put you off using it then, Tony? If it's a British thing, John, there's a lot of people out there in debt, and it's not just about drugs, and there's little or no help for them either. Somebody else saying, I said this before, these addicts need our help. They're the victims. Putting them down laneways is not the answer. And Catherine was on to say it's sad, Fran, that people just won't take God's word as serious. All predictions come from God, says Catherine, and that's making reference to our conversation about Old Moore's Almanac, I presume.
The Conspiracy Files on Tip Today.
Ali is with me with Conspiracy Files. This is a really odd one.
It is an odd one, and it's one that's been around for a while. And actually, when I was looking into it, I said, I'm sure I've done this before. I actually haven't done it before. And
I think we might have made reference
to we did,
this,
but we never dedicated an episode to it. And that is the issue of spontaneous human combustion. Now, this, I'm sure many people are aware of it. It's been a topic of great debate for many years, but it has actually come under the spotlight here in Ireland in recent years. And this was following the case of 76-year-old Michael Faherty, who was actually ruled to have died as a result of spontaneous human combustion as recently as 2010, so not that long ago. And that was according to the West Galway coroner, Dr. Kieran McLaughlin, who actually ruled that in his case. Now, commenting on that case, he said that it was the first time in his 25 years of investigating deaths that he had returned such a verdict. Now, just to look at the case of poor Michael Faherty, an experienced Garda crime scene investigator and a senior fire officer both told his inquest that they just could not explain how he came to be burnt to death, nor had they ever come across such an event before. Now, Assistant Chief Fire Officer Jerry O'Malley said that fire officers were satisfied that after a thorough investigation, an open fire in Mr. Faherty's fireplace was absolutely not the cause of his death. Now, no trace of an accelerant was found at the scene. There was also no sign that anyone else had entered or left Mr. Faherty's home in Galway City. The inquest also heard that the smoke alarm in his home and also in the home of his neighbour, Tom Mannion, had actually gone off at 3 a.m. This was on the night of December 22nd of 2010. Now, in his deposition, Mr. Mannion said he went outside and saw heavy smoke coming from Mr. Faherty's house. He banged on the front door but got no response, then banged on the door of another neighbour. Gardaí and the fire brigade arrived very quickly on the scene, and Garda Gerard O'Callaghan said he'd gone into the house after the fire had been extinguished and found Mr. Faherty lying on his back in the sitting room with his head closest to the open fireplace. Now, what was strange about this is the fire was confined to just that small area. The rest of the house sustained only smoke damage. No accelerant found, nothing to suggest foul play. And the Gardaí involved said the only damage was to the remains, to the floor underneath them and the ceiling above. The body itself had been completely burned to ash. Now, the inquest heard that fire officers were unable to determine the cause or the origin of the fire. Now, pathologist Professor Grace Callaghy noted in her post-mortem findings that Mr. Faherty did suffer from type 2 diabetes and hypertension, but he did not die because of heart failure. Now, his body was completely cremated, and because of the extensive damage, it was impossible to determine the exact cause of death. The coroner also said he was satisfied that nobody had entered or left. While a fire had been burning in the fireplace, the fire itself was not the cause of the blaze. And speaking about it, Dr. McLaughlin said this fire was thoroughly investigated, and I'm left with the conclusion that this fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. Now, after the inquest, Mr. Faherty's daughter Maureen said the family were satisfied with the extent of the investigation and they accepted the ruling.
What do we know about spontaneous human combustion? I mean, well, what's the background?
Well, it's had a funny kind of cycle in how it's been treated by people, because though today it's mostly scientifically discredited, it was considered a legitimate medical entity in Europe at the beginning of the 17th century. Now, in the 18th and 19th centuries, spontaneous human combustion referred to the burning of a living human body without any evident external cause of ignition. Now, it was a phenomenon naturally that shocked and confused European society since the early modern age. The term itself was actually coined by a man called Paul Rowley in 1745, and that was in an article published in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, which is a wonderful name for a publication. Following the mysterious death of Countess Cornelia Zangari Bandy. Now, Rowley himself was a member of the Royal Society, so he was aware of this case. It was initially researched by German physician Johann Henrik Kohausen, who suggested that some substances contained in the body, when combined with alcoholic beverages, could give rise to a spontaneous flame inside the body, which could explain these cases of human combustion. Now, the first written reference to a death from spontaneous human combustion is found in John Hilliard's Fire from Heaven in 1613, which describes the death on June 26 of that same year of John Hitchell in the UK. This was an interesting case because he was actually laying in bed next to his wife, and he exhaled thick smoke from his mouth with no apparent cause. Now, subsequently, the Danish physician and theologian Thomas Bartholin, known for describing the lymphatic system for the first time, he was also a strong advocate of combustion. He described several cases in 1654 based on previous reports from a Parisian physician. Among them, he described the death of a Polish soldier who, during the reign of the Queen of Bonasfora, and after drinking 2 glasses of brandy with his parents at their home in Milan, burped and immediately succumbed, spontaneously bursting into flame. In the same vein, the French physician Ines Dupont documented the testimony of Gallic surgeon Claude Nicolas Lecat in the trial held in 1725 in the French city of Reims against Jean Millet, the owner of a tavern, having found the corpse of his wife Jeanne. Now, in his writing, Dupont pointed that Lemaire suffered from alcoholism and that they were only able to identify her legs, a part of the head, some vertebrae and some other large bones. The rest of her body was a blackened and greasy mass. Now, Millet was charged with the murder of his wife, an offence that carried the death penalty. However, Lecat won his acquittal by convincing the jury that his wife had actually been a victim of spontaneous human combustion. Now, those are some of the most famous cases during that early part of the 19th and mid-20th centuries. There have been more recent cases, though, and unbelievably, some survivors. Wow. Here's the story of Frank Baker.
We were getting ready for fishing. We were sitting on the couch. Everything was great. Pete was sitting next to me. We were having one hell of a time. And all of a sudden,
it was the damnedest thing I've ever seen. Frank was freaking out and making me freak out.
I was in sheer panic. All I could do was try to fight it. I was petrified. I had no idea what was taking place with my body. None.
Eventually, Pete and Frank managed to extinguish the flames and get Frank to a doctor. For Frank, this was only the beginning, and the medical profession were no help.
The doctor was completely baffled, and he said, looking at it, Frank, this burned from the inside out. And he said, I've never, ever seen anything like this.
Yet Frank was nowhere near any source of heat or flame.
I wasn't smoking. There were no flames around. There was no lights on, no microwaves. All that was coming in was the sun from the far end of the house when this happened.
Yeah, but is alcohol the common denominator?
It is. And looking at all the cases, and we're going to go into that in a little while, alcoholics tend to be higher in victims of, or I suppose victims of spontaneous human combustion.
This
they
is
tend
with
to be
respect to
alcoholics.
Mr. Farley, because we don't know what the story is there.
No, we don't. We absolutely
yeah.
don't. And with the case of Frank Baker, what's interesting as well is a lot of the people who have died from it or who are thought to have died from it are alone. So it's thought what may have helped Frank Baker, who you heard there, was the fact he was with someone at the time who was able to help him put out the flames. So that's also interesting. They also tend to happen at night. So there is a theory that maybe these people are asleep, and added the likelihood of alcohol involved as well, that they're out for the count, and maybe that's why. But I mean, Frank is very lucky. It hasn't happened to him since, thankfully. But here's a news report from another case in the US just 10 years ago.
Authorities are investigating a separate Oklahoma house fire.
This was pretty strange, an unusual case, but investigators say the man inside may have spontaneously combusted. This happened in Sequoia County on Monday. Now, neighbors say they saw smoke coming out of the house. So once crews got inside, all they found was a man's burned body, but nothing else inside the home had been torched at all. So right now, they are investigating this as a suspicious fire, but crews say it could be spontaneous human combustion. You know, that's when fire burns inside the body.
That description sounds exactly like Mr. Farty's situation.
Yeah, it's just the body and the area immediately around the body. Nothing left. Like there is a famous case, if you look into it, of a lady in the UK from the 1930s, I believe. And she was deemed to have died by spontaneous human combustion. All that is left is her lower leg. And that's all you can see in the picture. She's right beside a fireplace. Nothing around her. She's a chair. The chair is untouched by fire, which is very close to her. Very strange.
Very strange indeed,
in relation to that fire in Oklahoma, Rick Russell is the fire chief that investigated that case, and he was completely stumped by the fire. Here's what he described.
I arrived on scene at 10:51 a.m. Notice when I pulled up, we only had a slight amount of smoke coming from the residence, no flame. The thing that really surprised me was there was nothing burnt around the body. The refrigerator just inches from the body. Plastic handle on the refrigerator door, no melting. Plastic handle on the cooking range, no melting. Trash bag laying just inches from the body, wasn't wrinkled from heat. This fire originated and stopped at the body.
From the evidence at the scene, it appears to be the body alone that burnt. And Fire Chief Russell concludes there was no external source, such as an explosion caused by gasoline.
I would rule against a flashover type because I think we would have more evidence of burning the ceiling area. Even the stove and the refrigerator should have shown signs if we had a explosion type fire.
Everyone who attended the scene is mystified. No one understands how this man burnt to ash while the house remained intact.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And what you must also remember is the heat that it would require to burn bone to ash. That is incredible heat, and for it not to even wrinkle a rubbish bag beside it. That's unbelievable.
One of our better read listeners telling us that Charles Dickens writes in Bleak House about the spontaneous human combustion of Mr. Cook.
There you go.
There you go now.
Yeah, so we have it. I mean, looking at the early studies as well into it, there was a very exhaustive review carried into it in 1800 by a gentleman called Pierre Aimé Lair. Now, he defended the direct relationship of the phenomenon with the chronic abuse of alcohol, which you highlighted as well, and its prevention through the virtue of temperance. So while other doctors, including English surgeon Erasmus Lloyd Devenold and the German physician Karl Heinrich Roche, advocated as a preventative treatment for spontaneous human combustion, filling the mouths of people at risk of ignition with manure and muddy water. Now, Benjamin...
That'd do it all right.
It would. You'd imagine that'd be some kind of accelerant manure. It's used in bombs. Benjamin Frank, a German physician or a surgeon, asserted that alcohol impregnated the organism with compounds containing phosphorus, which itself induced combustion. Now, this hypothesis was accepted by the Swedish physician Magnus Huss in his famous work as well on alcohol addiction. However, others like Franz Joseph Strubel, also a German physician, suggested that instead electrical currents produced inside the body were capable of splitting water into its basic components, oxygen and hydrogen, which would explain the cause of the phenomenon. Now, a lot of different medical journals as well published papers on this. The Lancet, the British Medical Journal, Provincial Medical and Surgical Journal 1, all of them really differing in their view on it. So, I mean, the conclusion then we're looking at, although alcohol doesn't make the body more flammable, severe inebriation or other forms of impairment may actually be a factor. Now, this, of course, will correlate with case studies which show the majority of victims were often alcoholic and overweight. More were female than male. So there was a general perception, so that it's kind of retribution for debauched lifestyle is what the thinking was in the 1800s. Now, this was reinforced then by lurid newspaper accounts of suspected cases. It made intuitive sense, after all, that a body saturated with a flammable substance like alcohol would be flammable. So is it real? Well, is the possibility of it real? And is it something we should be worried about? Well, the answer is almost certainly no, because none of the proposed scientific explanations for how a body could spontaneously burst into flame have really held up to scrutiny. Some of the early proposed mechanisms rely on outdated medical ideas, such as the notion that an ignition could be the result of an imbalance in bodily humours. Now, the Victorian explanation that alcohol rendered the body flammable doesn't work either, seeing that the concentrations of alcohol in even the most intoxicated people are much too low, and that an external source of ignition would always be required in that case anyway. Now, in the 20th century, forensic scientists noticed the wick effect, in which clothing worn by the victim can soak up melted fat, acting itself like the wick in a candle. Here's an explanation of how it works.
One popular explanation is the wick effect theory, which suggests that a person's clothing or other materials may act like a candle wick, drawing body fat to the surface and sustaining a slow-burning fire. Another theory points to the build-up of static electricity or even ball lightning as a potential cause. Of course, there are also those who lean towards more supernatural explanations, like divine intervention or the spontaneous ignition of the human soul.
Yeah, it's interesting. Have they simulated this in any way?
They have, and there was an interesting one done recently. There was an episode of BBC Science Earth that actually conducted an experiment on a dead pig. Now, I watched this and I was a bit dubious, but by the end I was wondering. It threw up some very interesting results. Have a quick listen to this.
Normally, if you fell asleep with a cigarette, the cigarette would just drop onto whatever you're wearing and then it would go. So we'll try it.
Yep. Let's see if that will take on the cotton blanket. Oh, it's starting to go, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like.
So that's the cigarette pretty much gone.
Yep.
It's burnt through the cotton. We're pretty much down to flesh. Now, normally, you'd simply wake up and put yourself out. But if you were already dead or otherwise incapacitated, you'd continue to burn. This could take many hours, so we're speeding things up to the point where the body catches fire. So it's been, what, an hour and a half now?
I reckon about an hour and a half.
Still burning away. We seem to have a beautiful flame just centred in the middle, don't we?
Yeah, if you look closer, you can see the skin split, and now the fat's rendering down, the fat's becoming liquid, and it's actually the fat of the animal that's burning.
And that fat is soaking into the remnants of the blanket. The pig's clothed body acts like an inside-out candle. The melting fat is the wax, and the blanket is the wick. And like a candle, the whole thing burns with a low flame, so the fire is unlikely to spread to the rest of the room. There you go. 5-6 hours later,
Yep.
You can see where that wick effect's happening right in the middle. I mean, this is it. It's a big pool of fat burrowing down with the flame.
Exactly, and that's where we start. That's where it started. That's where the cigarette caught fire.
And the head and the trotters...
Still intact.
Nothing. I mean, they haven't even been touched. And the reason? Bits not covered by clothing can't become part of the wick, and they don't contain enough fat to burn by themselves. The mystery of the burned torso explained.
Are you convinced by what you saw in there?
I think it burned very similar to how you would see victims of that burn, but it didn't burn to the degree where bone is brought to ash. So it didn't convince me entirely, but the pattern of it is very similar. So I'm not entirely convinced, but I think it could be an answer to it.
But surely the fact the pig was dead, thankfully, does that bring that whole simulation into question in some way? I mean,
well, it does. I mean, what they're saying is if you're inebriated, you're not maybe going to wake, but I'm sure if your insides are burning, you probably will. So look, the likely explanation for suspected cases is that there is some sort of external source of ignition, a match, a cigarette, maybe even an electrical spark that sets off that wick effect. But the evidence of it then, of course, is destroyed by the fire. So although alcohol doesn't make the body flammable, you'll be glad to hear, everybody.
You looked at me when you said that.
Not judgmentally. Severe inebriation or other forms of impairment may also be a factor in some of these deaths as well, since the victim may be unable to react to a slowly developing fire. So even though, medical and scientific opinion is still divided, while most cases involve some sort of alcohol, there are many other documented cases, of course, where it doesn't. So it still does remain a mystery. Could it be that there are certain biological conditions that can manifest that somehow cause the body to combust? Well, it's certainly a possibility.
Well, another very fine conspiracy, but mind yourself if you're drinking.
Stay away from the fire.
All right, thanks very much indeed. Some black humour there from our alley. 1800 938 007. We'll take a break, back with more.
Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage Puck-On. Now is the time to pick up your next van. From the award-winning Peugeot Partner van to the Expert and the load-lugging Boxer van. We have big vans, high-roof vans, long-wheelbase vans. You'll find them all at Slattery's Garage Puck-On. See slatterysgarage.ie.